It's the Real Estate Podcast, brought to you by ANZ Home Loans for financial well-beings.
And welcome to another episode of the Real Estate Podcast, available on iHeartRadio every morning and also on Spotify and Apple and wherever you get your podcasts from. No matter where, we are on all of them. Here we are once again. It is a Monday morning. Back with us. I hope you had a fantastic weekend. If you were transacting on property, trust that all went really well. It's the 17th day for October for 2022. We're rattling through October. November is going to be here before we know it. And several Melbourne houses have sold for more than $100,000 above reserve at auction this week. Now, PropTrack recorded a 64.5% preliminary clearance rate from around 322 with early figures available, with about 725 auctions held in Victoria this past week. And about 1,273 auctions are expected across the state this coming week. Now, there's definitely some positivity in the air for prices that are being paid in Melbourne. And you've got to wonder whether the 25 instead of the 50 basis points rise this month has anything to do with it. And I'm sure that it does. This, of course, isn't the case when it comes to some hesitation around homes that need renos because of that all-important building material cost that has been jacked up. So coming up, we are going to stay in Melbourne. We're going to talk very shortly to selling agent Warwick Gardiner because he's had some recent success with a property that he sold that went well north of reserve, showing that this uptick in Melbourne isn't a fleeting one. And we'll talk to Warwick in just a moment.
Informing you every morning from 6:30, 7 days a week on the Real Estate Breakfast.
Hey, just a reminder, if you've got any questions or suggestions, you can let us know by writing to our email, which is myrealestatepodcast@gmail.com. That is myrealestatepodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you're celebrating your birthday on this 17th day of October, Eminem, he is turning 49. He's nearly 50. Eminem, it's hard to imagine. Ernie Els is also celebrating today, the golfer. He is turning 52. And Kimi Räikkönen, the F1 Formula One driver, he is turning 44. So if you are celebrating, many happy returns.
We talk with leading property commentators with analysis, predictions, forecasts, and what's trending every morning from 6:30. It's the Main Centre Forecast with PRD, selling smarter every day.
And let's check on your weather around Australia. In Sydney this morning, expecting 1 or 2 pieces of rain with a high of 19 degrees. Melbourne should be mainly fine and sunny, expecting a top of 17. In Brisbane, a little bit of rain around the edges and expecting a high of 24. And in Perth today, expecting possible early morning rain and a high of 22 degrees.
It's your weekday real estate breakfast with news, interviews and predictions every morning on the Real Estate Podcast.
Well, Melbourne has seen some pretty decent higher price points lately, including an apartment that recently sold and went a bit mental the other day with a price of $630K being paid over the reserve. Yes, that's over the reserve. So let's bring in Warwick Gardiner from Jealous Craig, Port Phillip. And a very good morning to you, Warwick. Welcome to the Real Estate Podcast.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
This is a bit mental, keeping in mind that this is an apartment which is located in Middle Park, an amazing price being paid here, and you had a couple of hundred people there. Now, that's a serious crowd in any given market.
It is a serious crowd. Yeah, thanks. It was a huge crowd, 200 people. We would usually have 50 people at a maximum. It was an incredible atmosphere. It was a sunny day, close to the beach. All the conditions were just perfect for the auction.
Yeah, so what about the marketing side of this? Because you must have had a fair few going through this property.
We did. We had over, I think it was about 160 attendees over the 4-week period. And when you think attendees is one group, so often we were having 50 or 60 people through a half an hour inspection with multiple people with them. So there was generally 70, 80, 90, 100 people at the open each time. So 160 in total, but probably 300 or 400 through it over 4 weeks.
Okay, so you struck, as you say, a really nice day. How did the bidding unfold once the auction got underway?
Yeah, well, as always, even in a hot market, the first bid is usually the hardest to get. We started off with the preamble and called for an opening bid, and surprise, surprise, no one wanted to kick it off. But eventually we did get a gentleman put his hand up for $1.6 million. From that point onwards, we were taking $20,000 increments. We had another buyer come in and start competing with that first gentleman who kicked it off. And then quite quickly, we had 4 or 5 people bidding to compete with one another. At some stages of the bidding, I was actually having 3 or 4 parties with their hand in the air at the same time, me trying to take their bid, and that's incredibly rare in this market where you have multiple people bidding. The first bid's the hardest, but then, yeah, it came very, very quickly and was almost difficult to keep up at times.
Well, I mentioned that this is a $630,000 premium for the vendors. Emotions, they must have been running pretty high after that hammer came down, eh?
They were, yeah. The vendor was the niece of the actual vendor. So the person I was dealing with was a niece, and the vendor was in a nursing home. And so therefore the niece was selling it on her behalf. So it was an emotional time throughout the entire campaign because the niece was managing the entire process. She had power of attorney. She had the extra pressure that I guess it wasn't her home specifically, but she had the responsibility to make it work. So once it was sold for that extraordinary price, there were lots of tears and lots of hugs inside, and the niece assured me that her aunt was going to be extremely happy with the result and effectively would set up the rest of her life with the care that she needed and for the family.
Yeah, fantastic. And staying with auctions, now what do you say to people who might be thinking about moving away from an auction for a private treaty? I mean, this is a fantastic, I guess, nod to auctions working.
Yeah, I would say that if you're in an auction-orientated area, over the last few years, we would always advise to go through and try an auction if you feel like there may be a competitive environment. Even 2 people bidding at an auction is a competitive environment, and it only takes 2 people to push the bidding beyond where you thought your expectations or the price point might have been for that particular property. So you just never know. If 2 people get involved, they're going to compete heavily. There is no ceiling on price when there's an auction scenario. So you just never know on the day. Private sales are still okay and they work well, but I think that non-capping on price is always a good lure to see what the market is prepared to pay, particularly as well if you've got something unique. If you've got a unique property, you just really never know what the price is going to be because it's worth what someone's prepared to pay. And if you're lucky enough, you can have a result like this.
And the property market where you are is doing what exactly at the moment in terms of the current landscape with interest rates and sentiment?
Yeah, current landscape is really a shortage of stock for us. We're based in Middle Park and Albert Park, so we're only 2 or 3 kilometres from the Melbourne CBD. It's a popular area all year round, and at the moment there's been a real lack of stock since interest rates were on the rise, partly due to people who are not really needing to sell, having to put their property on the market. The thing is though, is we still have good demand and good locations anywhere across Australia. We'll always have that. Being close to the city, close to transport, beach in this case, is always going to be popular. So we're finding at the moment our clearance rate locally is about 80%, despite the Victorian clearance rate at about 55 to 60%. But that's largely due to low stock. Demand is still okay, and we feel like that will continue through towards to the end of the year.
Right, so your days on market must be improving then at the moment.
They are. Our average days on market are 28 through the auction scenario. So again, 90% of our properties we would put to auction. Our days on market for private sales is about 60. So again, that's going back to your earlier question. That's a further incentive to consider an auction versus a private treaty.
And Warwick, just before I let you go, being on the ground there in Melbourne, how do you feel the market is going to go with the run-up to the end of this year?
We feel that interest rates will still keep a lot of sellers away from the market while they wait to see what happens and effectively let the dust settle. So for those who are considering selling towards the end of the year, I think you're going to be in a market where your home is not necessarily competing with many others in the marketplace. So we feel that for sellers, it's still going to be a reasonable run home to the end of the year with multiple parties considering your property. And for buyers, it's going to be hard to find that right property right through to Christmas. So if something comes up, my advice is between now and Christmas, which is really our busy part of the spring year, is to try to secure something, or if you're a seller, try to get your property on the market and maximise the competition we're seeing at the moment.
All right, good on you, Warwick. I'll let you go. Thank you so much for coming on to the Real Estate Podcast this morning, and good luck there in Melbourne.
Thanks very much for having me.
We connect you to the best real estate information across Australia. The Real Estate Podcast.